Welcome to ACC Nation, featuring sports news and special guest interviews. Here's Will Ojanen and Jim Quist.
This is ACC Nation's Miami football preview with the staff writer for Miami for The Athletic, host of Wide Right podcast, regular on the Big O Show, cheesy show at that, and frequently on WSBN Sports Extra. In addition to The Athletic, he has provided content for the New York Times and ESPN Plus. Here to share his thoughts on the 2024 version of the Canes is our special guest, Manny Navarro. Manny, thank you for joining us and talking Miami football.
Thanks, Jim. Happy to be reunited with you. I know we've been trying to get this done for a while now. Very busy time for me and my kids, but you guys worked around my schedule, so I owe you one for sure.
Just being here is payment enough, Manny. Thank you for joining us. Hey, last season the Canes offense was second in the conference in total offense. The dagger for the season, however, was the amount of turnovers in really just in 3 games. A few here and there elsewhere, but those 3 games were enough to just sort of put a mark on where things were headed for Mario Cristobal. Talk to us a little bit now about, and let's start with the O-line, because for me, everything starts with that O-line, and without a solid O-line, then everything else becomes a question mark. So let's talk about the offensive line and how that's going to look this season.
Yeah, I mean, I think you hit it on the head as far as what happened last year. I think most people looked at that Miami team and the turnovers and thought, well, they should have been more successful, right? You go to that Georgia Tech game and how that sort of unraveled things for them. But up front, they were really, really good, and that's why they beat Clemson last year. That was sort of a monumental win for Mario Cristobal and the program, and a sort of a proving point for him, right? He's been so focused on improving Miami on both sides of the line of scrimmage, and I think he's really done that. I think if you want to take something away from his first 2 years on the job, besides the elite recruiting, he's built up the offensive and defensive lines to elite levels, and they've got 4 starters essentially back, even though one of them is a transfer from Indiana. Zach Carpenter, the center, takes over from Matt Lee. He's a guy with 27 career starts, a former Michigan signee who spent the last couple of years at Indiana and thought he did a pretty good job there for the Hoosiers. Didn't win a lot of games, but good player, a guy that sort of just slides right into that center spot and brings a lot of veteran experience. And he'll be surrounded by Jalen Rivers, who was a starting left tackle last season, really proved himself, played well. He's got Inez Cooper on his right side at right guard, and that's just a huge human being, really, really big guy, 330 pounds plus, 6'4", 6'5", not small whatsoever. And then Francis Mauigoa, the fabulous freshman. So 4 out of the 5 starters are guys with serious college experience. Mauigoa, of course, freshman All-American last year, a guy who was just super consistent, former 5-star recruit. So Mario has a solid offensive line. The one question in camp was who's going to be the starting left guard. Alex Mirabal, Miami's offensive line coach, the first guy he recruited when he got to Miami was Matthew McCoy. And McCoy was a 3-star kid out of the Jacksonville area, not really highly recruited, but a guy that Mirabal immediately identified as, this guy has the raw ingredients to come in and be somebody that we really like and develop and has maybe 2 or 3 years here as a starter for us. So he's kind of slotted into that left guard spot. He's got a little bit of depth behind him. Samson Okololo is another 5-star recruit that Miami got in the previous cycle along with Mauigoa. Didn't play a lot last year, got hurt. But those are the 6 guys I would say that the coaching staff is really, really excited about. And they feel like, hey, this is a winning offensive line, the kind of offensive line that can set the tone week in and week out and protect Cam Ward and help push this program along in the direction they want to go.
And what a transition you just made there, going into Cam Ward. And
yeah,
so, start out with that offensive line. And what you're telling me is that is a pretty solid setup here. So the question becomes, as we move on from Van Dyke to Cam Ward, who quite frankly, probably was the best quarterback available in the transfer portal. What is he going to bring to the table to take advantage of that solid line. Is he a pocket passer or is he a combination quarterback?
Yeah, I think he was more of a combination quarterback last year at Washington State out of necessity, and that was just because they didn't have a consistent running game around him. He scored a lot of touchdowns in the red zone with runs. He also fumbled a ton. He's fumbled a lot in his career, and so I think now Miami wants to protect him with that offensive line, let him hand the ball off to Damian Martinez and Mark Fletcher and all these talented backs that they have, and really throw the football the majority of the time. And he's got an excellent collection of receivers around him and three guys who had over 800 yards receiving last year. So there's a lot of weapons for Cam Ward to work with. He doesn't need to be special every single play. He doesn't have to run around and wait for somebody to get open. He's going to have time to throw the football. He's going to have places to go with the football, more certainly than he had at Washington State. And I think that's why a lot of people look at this Miami team and say, hey, they could win the conference this year. They've got as complete an offense as anybody in this league. And Cam Ward is the ignition switch to it all, really. He's got to go out, protect the football, get the ball to his playmakers, and I think the rest will take care of itself. He's a guy who I think is headed to the NFL. Whether or not that's a day two or a day three guy remains to be seen. But look, they selected a preseason player of the year in the league for a reason, and I think a lot of people see his upside, his potential, his ability, his leadership, and they just like who he is.
You talked a little bit about the receiving core. Of course, we'll jump into the running backs here in just a minute and talk about what's behind him. But let's talk about this wide receiver core and tight ends as well, about what type of weapons you have there, because we've got some people who are returning. There's a lot of strengths. There's also a pretty solid transfer portal guy coming in from Houston.
Yeah. Sam Brown was a huge pickup, I thought, for Miami in the portal. And talking to Cam Ward and Charlotte at the ACC media event earlier this month, he talked a lot about just how Sam is so special at winning, beating man coverage and catching the ball over the shoulder and being a deep threat. Sam is a guy who was consistent at Houston previously, played for Miami's offensive coordinator there, and comes over having proven himself. 62 catches, I think 815 yards, 3 touchdowns last year. Reliable, a guy that can line up on the outside and beat his guy most of the time. And so you pair him up with Jacoby George. Jacoby George, you go back and you look at his numbers from last year, especially moments against Texas A&M, moments against Florida State where he had a long touchdown catch. The kind of guy who's explosive, reminds you of some of the guys that have played at Miami before and had pretty good NFL careers. And then, of course, Xavier Restrepo in the slot, a guy who had over 1,000 yards receiving, 85 catches, probably the best slot receiver in the league, if not college football, in just terms of being able to find space in zone coverage, getting comfortable, tough as nails, catching the ball, even when he gets hit really, really hard. And so those three guys are the proven weapons. And I would add there's a couple of other on this roster, a couple of other guys on this roster that I know Mario Cristobal is excited about. One of them is a guy who's been here now for a couple years, Isaiah Horton, a kid out of Tennessee, who's sort of the big, tall wide receiver. He's going to replace Colby Young, who left for Georgia in the offseason. He'll replace him as sort of the big target in the red zone. Isaiah is a guy who had a really good spring, and the coaching staff is super excited about him. Only 13 catches for 168 yards and a touchdown last year, but I think when you talk about Miami's first four receivers, those are all guys that have shown something. Beyond that, freshman class is really good. JoJo Trader, kid out of the South Florida area, top 50 recruit in his class. Nye Carr, a kid out of Georgia, another top 100 recruit. Two guys that just sort of highlight Mario's recruiting ability and the things that he does on the trail every single year. Guys that are certainly, I think, ready to slot in next year to replace a Jacoby George and a Sam Brown as sort of the explosive playmakers on the outside. So the coaching staff is definitely excited about the wide receiver position. We'll move over to tight end really quickly. Cam McCormick is kind of just an interesting story. We can dive into him for a minute. He's in his 9th year of college football, just so many series of injuries, but a guy that Mario really trusts, especially in blocking situations. Miami's tight end position had a really off year statistically, and a big part of that was Elijah Arroyo coming back from injury, didn't really recover, didn't really have confidence in his knee. He's got a little bit more of it now. He's had a full year to sort of get over a pretty serious knee injury that affected him. He's in his fourth year at Miami now, a guy that has oodles of talent, and the guy who I expect to really be productive. And then last but not least, the guy who was the story of the spring, Elijah Lofton, freshman that they got out of Las Vegas Bishop Gorman, a guy that I think has tremendous upside. Mario lines him up in the backfield, he makes plays. He lines him up wide, he makes plays. Lines him up in the slot, he makes plays. This is a guy, when you talk about the future at Miami, who's going to take over for some of the older guys that I mentioned. Elijah Lofton is somebody they're really excited about. So they've got a lot of weapons, a lot of personnel that Cam Ward can work in this offense.
9 years, huh? He's catching up with us on the gray hair scene there.
He really is. He really is. But I think the only ninth year player in college football. But that's what happens when you get COVID years and red shirts.
Yep. From the standpoint of running back, the depth and the experience, and being able to come out of the backfield and grab passes. Talk to us a little bit about what you see there. Sort of, I look at this wide receiving core and the ability there and what you've just laid out, and I'm just going like, wow, this is going to end up being a passing team. But then I start looking in the backfield. So,
yeah.
And you've got another portal that transferred there that is an absolute workhorse.
Yeah, really, Damian Martinez was a pivotal pickup for Miami, and that's only because Mark Fletcher and the way his season ended last year, getting injured in the bowl game, in the Pinstripe Bowl, having a pretty serious Liz Frank injury, and the coaching staff being unsure of what was going to happen with him. But Mark Fletcher, make no mistake, Miami's coaching staff super excited. They stole him from Ohio State late in the recruiting process, and are so fired up about Mark. He's 6'2", 225 pounds, a bulldozer, super fast, great hands out of the back. Reminds me a lot of Alonzo Highsmith. Jim, you've been around college football a long time. Alonzo Highsmith was the number 3 overall pick way back when, and really a Hurricane legend. And that's the kind of personality Mark Fletcher has. I think he's going to be a guy who is around this game for a long, long time, and a special player. But Damian Martinez is a proven, healthy, tough running back to stop. I think finished second or third in the Pac-12 last year in rushing, ran for over 1,000 yards. He is a load himself, 6 foot, 236 pounds. Miami has 2 really, really elite running backs in my mind, guys that could probably start in a lot of other schools. And when you have that kind of depth at that position, and especially now when some teams may be playing 17 games to win a national championship, you need more than one guy, right? And so they're confident in those two. And look, AJ Allen's a kid that came over from Nebraska last year. He's kind of a speed back, a change of pace guy. Had his moments, had an impressive touchdown last year. I think it was against Virginia, if I'm not mistaken, where he hurtled over a defender, and just, you were like, wow, okay, that's another guy to watch in this offense. So I think between the 3 of them, you got 3 other younger guys behind them they're just there to add depth, but quality players that a year or 2 from now we'll be talking about as well. But they're loaded at the running back. This is Shannon Dawson, God bless him. I don't know how he's going to keep everybody in that offensive room happy. I don't know if he's going to have enough footballs to hand around to everyone, but it's a good problem to have. And if you're a Miami fan, you should be happy about that.
You briefly touched on this, and I know that on the Big O show you were talking about recruiting. And by the way, that's very entertaining watching you 2 guys going back and forth. It's fun to watch. You can pass that along. So one thing that I pull up, and I look at the 24/7 composite, and for recruiting, and Miami for 24 is number 4. Miami is number 10, at least the last I looked, for 25, number 10 for 26. This speaks volumes about where this team is headed under Mario Cristobal. Talk to us about the recruiting prowess of this coaching staff.
Yeah, well, look, recruiting has become a numbers game every single year because you're going to have kids that transfer out, right? There's going to be kids that are unhappy. They don't want to stay in the program for very, very long. So you constantly have to recruit at an elite level to make winning sustainable. And Miami's NIL collective, the Canes Connection, they are very much in step with Mario Cristobal in terms of showing him the support that he needs. You mentioned, the future classes. The last two were top seven in the 247 Sports Composite, including 3 5 stars on the defensive line that they brought in last year. You go back to the year before, they loaded up on offensive linemen. We already talked about Francis Mauigoa and Samson Okunlola. Mario is building this thing in a way that tells you Miami should be a preeminent team in college football again soon. So but again, the transfer portal is really interesting, and that's why, uh, he doesn't just sort of ignore the transfer portal. He also plucks veterans out of there every single year. You have to replenish your roster. You got to have young players that you're developing, and you got to have older guys that you can trust. And it's just a recycling every single year. And so that's why ultimately I've got faith in Mario Cristobal that he's going to get this thing right because he knows how important the offensive and defensive lines are. He knows how important the transfer portal is. And in the long run, if you get the right quarterback, you get the right weapons around them, you can win big in college football. And so I've got a lot of faith in the way he's building this.
I got a question for you. You brought up on the show, and I'll keep going back to it because I keep
Yeah.
now I've got pizza on the mind, so that's a bad thing. But you brought up the NIL rules
Mhm.
changing in Florida, and specifically for high school. How is that going to impact recruiting at the next level?
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see. I spent a lot of time talking to high school coaches at recent media days, and really, I mean, these new laws just got passed here at the end of July, and I think a lot of these high school players see what's happening in college football, see that they can start making some money now at the high school level. So I would expect that, our college football teams have always found interesting ways to get on the good side of recruits even before NIL and all these other rules. So it'll be interesting to see how the money exchanges hands and all that kind of stuff happens. But I think the most important thing for Mario and this program going forward and how this affects him, he's got to win some games. He's got to prove that the last couple years were building years, rebuilding years. Because ultimately, Jim, being around these high school recruits, talking to them, they don't want to go to programs that are mediocre. They don't want to go to programs that have a head coach who has a reputation for not taking a knee against Georgia Tech and blowing the game. They want to see them win. And those are the kind of things Mario has to be able to do here in year three to be able to maintain the success that he's had on the recruiting trail. And really, that's what I think it all comes back to because you're going to get paid anywhere you go in college football nowadays. It's part of the deal, right? NIL, we're talking about college football budgets. The Athletic reported this with Ohio State and some of the other programs, upwards of $20 million, right, for some of these rosters. And I think ultimately, recruiting classes are not cheap. And if you want to sign some of these recruits that are highly, highly touted, you're gonna have to pony up. And Ohio State's learned that. It's losing 3 straight years to Michigan. They know they've got to change their ways. They certainly have. And I think Mario Cristobal, from day one, the day he set foot back in Coral Gables after leaving Oregon, he knew the only way this was going to change by being in lockstep with your NIL collective. And that's what's happened. And so we will see the long-term effects ultimately with high school guys. But I think right now they've got the system under control and they're bringing in new recruits every single year, which tells me they're doing their job.
Ever the optimist. Um, let's let's go into the defensive side of the Hurricane. When you allow 27 or more in 5 games, you've got to tighten things up just a little bit. And
Yeah.
I'm assuming that this is an area of concern. How's it going to be addressed?
Yeah, I think for Miami, they tried to address a lot of their problems by recruiting through the transfer portal, a lot of experienced guys on that defensive line. Look, they haven't done as well, I think, in the secondary, getting guys to come to their program in terms of elite DBs through the high school ranks. And So Mario went out. He pulled in Amish Powell from Washington, who played the national championship game, started 25 games in his career. Went out and got a little bit of veteran help in the secondary. Got a kid out of Marshall, Deani Hill, who was a 9-game starter. Guys that are familiar with people on his coaching staff to try to upgrade some of the problems that befell them in the secondary last year. You go back, you look at the North Carolina game, you look at other games that they gave up a lot of points, and a lot of it was bad coverage, mistakes in the secondary, etc. One way to resolve that ultimately, Jim, is by having a ridiculously good defensive line, somebody who's going to put a lot of pressure on opposing quarterbacks. And so you already had Ruben Bain here, right? You had a kid who was the ACC Defensive Freshman of the Year and played, I think, beyond his mind as a true freshman last year. It's hard for a defensive lineman to come in and have the kind of impact Ruben Bain did. You've got a healthy Akeem Mesidor who missed all but 2 games last year. He was only around for the first 2. A guy who was really good in 2022. And then what you did if you're Mario Cristobal, you go out and you pick up 5 guys in the transfer portal that are double-digit starters in big time places. Simeon Barrow, when they got out of Michigan State, 30 career starts for the Spartans. Tyler Barron, one of the best pass rushers in the SEC at Tennessee, 19 career starts. Elijah Alston, a kid out of Marshall, again, somebody who played for Lance Guidry and this coaching staff before, somebody they trust, a guy who's really good at putting pressure on opposing quarterbacks on the edge. Marley Cook out of Middle Tennessee, an excellent pass rusher on third downs in the middle. And then CJ Clark from NC State, 23 career starts for the Wolfpack, a guy that beat Miami last year, stuffed the run, really made a bunch of problems for the Hurricanes in that loss. So you got 7 guys with double-digit career starts on that defensive line. And oh, by the way, then you go out and recruit 8 defensive linemen, including 3 5-star kids and Armando Blunt and Marquise Lightfoot. And then the big one, Justin Scott, who already made Bruce Feldman's freaks list this year, is just an absolute stud, a guy who has the size, the athletic ability. So this is, to me, Jim, as deep a defensive line as Miami has had in a long, long time, as talented a defensive line as Miami's had in a long, long time. Go back to last year. Why was Florida State so good? Why did they go 13-0 and win the conference championship? They did a lot of great things with Jordan Travis in that offense, but the reality is that defensive line was special. Jared Verse, Patrick Payton, all the pass rushers. So Miami has that kind of defensive line now, and I think that's going to help them resolve a lot of their defensive woes.
Since you brought up FSU there, Miami is in preseason rankings at number 19, and I, quite frankly, thought that was a little low.
Mm-hmm.
Would you agree with that, or would you think they're in the right place?
Well, coming off a 7-6 season, Jim, I think a lot of people have their doubts still about Mario Cristobal, and we've talked about the Georgia Tech game now twice, and I think he really needs to prove himself as a game day coach. I really do, and he's won some big games. He obviously won the Pac-12, won a Rose Bowl when he was out at Oregon before, but when you have the kind of moment you had against Georgia Tech and it really unravels your season, right? That Miami never really recovered after that game. They were 4-0, played Georgia Tech, blow the lead late, and then they end up 7-6. When that kind of thing happens, people are going to question you as a coach, right? Does your team have the mental fortitude that it needs, etc.? So to me, 19 is respectable, probably too low. I think Miami is a top 10 team in terms of talent. Certainly, you talked about that in terms of what people project their overall roster. But they got to earn it. And Cam Ward needs to prove he can protect the football and he can lead a more talented team with more talent around him, not be careless with the football sometimes. So they've got to prove some stuff, certainly. But do I expect Miami to be ranked higher by the Absolutely. I think this is year 3. It's been a long time. This is as good a roster as Miami's had in a long time.
Well, certainly some of the best linebackers that I'm, at least on paper here, because until they play, who knows, right? And also the transfer portal helping out at safety, corner, it looks good. Everything looks far more solid this season and I would say encouraging. If I were a Miami fan looking at this, I would be feeling really good about where this team is projected.
Yeah, absolutely. I think you bring up linebacker Kiko Mauinoa. Most people I don't think realized how good he was last season, but 18 tackles for loss was among the leaders in the ACC. 7.5 sacks, led Miami with 82 tackles. He, of course, is uh, Francis Mauinoa's older brother. Came over from Washington State last year in the transfer portal. uh, Kiko Mauinoa thought about going to the NFL. I think he was seriously considering it. He was getting feedback from the league, thought that he could be a day 3 pick and sort of start his career. And ultimately, the only reason he came back was to spend another year with his brother and to be around his family and to sort of enjoy college. And I think ultimately here, you got one of the more special talents at the linebacker position in the league in Kiko Mauinoa. And you mentioned the transfer portal. I thought Miami had an excellent pickup at linebacker, probably a very underrated pickup in Jalen Alderman, a guy who started 17 games at Louisville, who is familiar to this coaching staff, played for Miami's linebackers coach at Louisville, Derek Nicholson, who's come over and I think done an excellent job recruiting the position in the 2 years he's been here under Mario Cristobal. And then you got Wesley Basainth, who started 13 games over the last 2 years, a junior who is local, a solid playmaker out of Miami Central. You've got 3 guys at that linebacker position that you feel really, really good about. And then some younger guys who just got here. Bobby Pruitt, kid out of Alabama, 3-star recruit. Um, the coaching staff can't stop talking about this guy behind the scenes. I mean, they're like, he is a talent, a guy who could play safety, kind of hybrid outside linebacker, excellent in coverage. They're pumped about him. They're pumped about Popo Aguirre, who's now in his second year, the redshirt freshman. Mario, again, if you're going to get to the point where you can win consistently, you have to recruit, retain players, and develop them over a 2 to 3 year span. So all of these linebackers, the young guys behind Alderman, Basainth, Mauinoa, Aguirre, Bobby Washington, Malik Bryant, Chase Smith, Darius Hayes, the freshman who just got here. These are all guys that don't have to be rushed into the fold. They can take their time behind the 3 guys that are in front of them and develop and have roles. And then when they're ready, get ready to take over. And so I really I think Miami's front 7 is dynamic. My questions are more about the secondary than anything else.
Since we're running out of time here, synopsize, if you would, special teams, how that looks this season.
Yeah, well, you got Andres Borregales, who's the All ACC preseason selection, a guy who was All ACC last year as a kicker, just excellent, excellent kicker. A guy who, of course, his brother won the Lou Groza Award a couple years ago, and to me, he will certainly be in the chase for that. And then Dylan Joyce, sophomore, comes over from Australia. Miami has that pipeline now. They got Lou Headley a couple of years ago. Headley's in the NFL now. Well, Dylan was pretty excellent, pretty consistent last year, close to 44-yard average on his punts. Solid job overall, filling those shoes. So I think from a kicking perspective, Miami's well set up there. And then from a return perspective, you'll see Xavier Restrepo. He's sort of Mr. Consistent on punt returns. He will handle a lot of that stuff. Not a lot of kickoff and punt returns anymore with the way teams operate, but as long as you don't turn the ball over, that's what's most important.
Real quickly, this schedule, I'm looking at it, and it's sort of a mixed bag, but it may be one of the better schedules that Miami's been dealt in a few years. There's no Clemson, NC State, SMU, among others, on that list. But they start out the season against Florida, which could or could not be just mentally challenging more than anything, I think, this season. How do you look at this schedule, and what do you see as potential road bumps?
Yeah, I think Florida, anytime you open the season against a rival in a place like Gainesville, I know that the Gators have struggled, and Billy Napier finished last season on a 5-game losing skid, and people want his hide up there in Gainesville. They want to see this thing turn around quickly or else. But they are a team that is still an SEC team, still recruits at an SEC level. And so that is a dangerous game to start week one on the road in a place like that. Miami hasn't won an SEC road game, I think, since they won in Gainesville back in 2002 in terms of an opener. So it's been a long time since Miami's done that. And then, you look at the rest of the schedule. You got a trip to USF on September 21st. I really like what Alex Golesh has done there. They should be one of the best group of five programs, I think, in the country. Dynamic quarterback in Byron Brown. Then you open ACC play 6 days later at home against Virginia Tech, a game that's not going to be easy with Kyron Drones. Him and Cam Ward have a special relationship. Two guys that train together, same quarterback coach. That'll be a fun ACC opener. You got a trip to Cal the following week. Anytime you got to go to the West Coast, get on a plane and fly for 5 hours, 6 hours, it's not going to be fun for your team to do. You don't have to normally do that. That's going to be something they'll experience. You got Louisville the week, 2 weeks after that. That's not going to be an easy game. I think Jeff Brom is an excellent coach, has a dynamic offense, and I expect them to be good as well. And then you got Florida State. October is not a cakewalk for the Hurricanes whatsoever. So those are the games that I've sort of circled. And then you end the year at Syracuse. And look, say what you will about the way the Orange ended last year. Kyle McCord is a good quarterback, and they've done an excellent job in the transfer portal, picking some quality players up. So there's a lot of games here that are not easy, but win total is 9.5. I think this is a team that can definitely cross that threshold.
Interesting. I will hesitate to use this term from here on out, or even ask if the U is back, because we're just going to leave that in the past.
Yes.
Best way to approach things. Manny Navarro with The Athletic, and make sure that you subscribe to Wide Right Podcast. You got that, everybody? Wide Right Podcast. Subscribe there. Subscribe to The Athletic so that you have all of the Miami content from The Athletic with Manny. And, of course, catch him on the Big O because it's worth watching. Trust me. Those guys have a great time. Manny Navarro, thank you, sir, for joining us and giving us a preview of Miami Hurricanes football.
Thank you, Jim, for having me. And, I look forward to our next conversation. Hopefully next year when we do this again, the Hurricanes will have actually accomplished something, and we're not talking and wondering, is the U back? They actually are back.
Thanks for listening to ACC Nation. Be sure to listen, like and subscribe to our podcast, radio, and YouTube channels by visiting accnation.net. Follow us on Instagram, X, Facebook, Mastodon, Threads, Blue Sky and Reddit at ACC Nation.
ACC Nation.